clad in a blinding white power suit, barking orders like a deranged dictator. She stormed onto my lawn with two sweaty landscapers and butchered my $2,000 0 cents hedges like she was leading a hostile garden coup, all while live streaming it with the smugness of a tyrant on a HOA throne. When I confronted her, she didn't flinch. "You should have read the handbook better, sweetheart." That was the moment I stopped being a model resident and became her worst nightmare. I should have known something was off when the welcome committee showed up wearing pearls and a glare sharp enough to slice drywall. 3 days into moving into Chestnut Hollow, a neighborhood that sounded like it came with complimentary muffins, I found myself facing the queen of suburban oppression herself, Karen Winters, HOA president, clipboard sorceress, and full-time vibe assassin. She didn't knock. She ding-donged with the same energy as a repo man and stood there in a pastel power suit like she was about to conduct a surprise IRS audit. "Welcome to Chestnut Hollow," she chirped, handing me a binder so thick it could stop a bullet. "You'll want to familiarize yourself with the rules. Page 47 covers lawn gnome height restrictions. Oh, and do avoid solar lights that blink. They disrupt the aesthetic harmony." A beautiful lady, Lane Jackson. I'm Jackson Cole, 15 years in structural engineering, a healthy respect for symmetry, and until this moment, a man who thought a HOA was just a group of folks who lacked matching mailboxes. But Karen treated bylaws like scripture and wielded her authority like a toddler with a Sharpie and no adult supervision. My house sat on a corner lot, which, according to her, came with extra responsibility. Apparently, my exposed side yard was considered a visual anchor of the community and thus subject to enhanced scrutiny. Translation: if a leaf hit the ground, I'd probably get a citation. I tried to laugh it off, thinking, how bad could it be? Cue thunder rumble. The first month went fine. I followed every absurd rule. My trash bins were timed like Olympic athletes, curbside only, within the 12-hour regulation window. I painted my porch a color called pine mist, which, according to the HOA palette, was one shade away from violating mood continuity. I even installed an American flag on an HOA-approved pole at precisely the 60-degree angle mandated in subsection 3.42, because freedom, but like tidy. And for a while, I was invisible. Karen rolled by in her Lexus like a storm cloud with a Bluetooth headset, but never stopped. I thought I was safe until the hedges. I'd planted a row of emerald arborvitae, approved species, correct height, proper distance from the curb, and I had the permit receipts to prove it. They were glorious, tall, green, symmetrical, the kind of hedges that whispered privacy and muffled the sound of Karen's SUV tires of tyranny. 3 weeks in, I came home to a horror show. My hedges shredded, mutilated, butchered like they owed someone money. 2 landscapers were packing up trimmers, and there stood Karen, arms crossed like a Bond villain at a garden expo. "Those were in violation," she said flatly. "Obstructed the line of sight at the corner, section 4.7b. I had to act fast." "For safety? You what?" I blinked. I never got any notice." "We emailed the neighborhood. Standard protocol." She handed me a bill for the hedge removal, $375, 0 cents, neatly stapled, with a smiley face in the memo line. I'd blood boiled. My engineer blood, the kind that respects logic, order, and things built to last. I held that ridiculous invoice, staring at the remains of my privacy, and thought, so that's how we're playing it? She pranced off in her heels, probably humming the national anthem of HOA tyranny. But something had cracked open in me. Not rage, not revenge, resolve. Karen wanted a fight? Great. She'd just picked one with the wrong guy. That night, I cracked open the HOA handbook like it was a murder mystery, a highlighter in one hand and bourbon in the other. 78 pages of bureaucratic poetry written by someone who clearly hated joy. But I wasn't looking for loopholes. I was looking for justice with documentation. And buried on page 62 like a golden ticket dipped in sarcasm was my salvation. Structural privacy elements. According to Bylaw 7.31, I was allowed to build a 6-foot wall made from approved materials pending architectural committee review. That's right. No more bushes for Karen to butcher. I was going full cinder block fortress, HOA sanctioned and bulletproof. The kicker? If the committee didn't respond within 14 days, the project was automatically approved. Guess who chaired the committee? Karen emailed sufficient Winters herself. I filed everything the next morning, stamped, certified, and kissed with legal compliance. Blueprints, soil reports, even a rendering of how the wall would look once painted in desert almond, a color chosen specifically to match the HOA's sacred palette of sad beige Eaton. I gave them 2 weeks, 14 days to respond. Crickets. I even called twice, got the same polite brush off. It's in review. By day 15, I was in a rented excavator digging trenches like I was preparing for a medieval siege. That's when the HOA Batmobile screeched up and Karen leapt out, heels stabbing my lawn like they were trying to find oil. "Stop that machine right now," she barked, waving her arms like she was guiding in a malfunctioning drone. I shut it off and hopped down, casually brushing dust off my clipboard. "Hi, Karen, you're just in time. Construction has officially begun." "You're not authorized to build a wall," she shrieked, holding her iPad like it was about to shoot lasers. "You didn't get committee approval." Actually, per bylaw 7.31, I said, flipping to the page like a smug magician, "No response after 14 days equals approval." I submitted on the 5th. Today's the 20th. I have the delivery receipt, signed by you. Cute signature, by the way. Little heart over the I. Her face turned a shade of red not found on any HOA-approved paint swatch. "This is unacceptable. I'll be calling an emergency board meeting." Go for it. But in the meantime, this wall's going up. I smiled, climbing back into the cab and starting the engine. Karen stood there, stunned, lips pursed so tightly they could cut wire. The rumble of the excavator drowned out her flailing protests, and as the first load of concrete hit the trench, I felt a deep, satisfying shift, not just in the dirt, but in the balance of power. Later that week, as the wall rose block by glorious block, neighbors started stopping by. At first, it was curiosity. Then came the war stories. Rick from across the street had been fined for planting tulips that clashed with seasonal colored guidelines. Dana got cited for a hummingbird feeder, a feeder, for God's sake. One guy swore Karen made his wife cry over an unapproved mailbox flag. I realized this wasn't just about my Hedges. It was about everybody. Karen hadn't just built an HOA. She'd built a regime. And my wall, it wasn't just masonry. It was a revolution in beige. By week's end, my wall was halfway up and already causing seismic tremors through Sunnyside Estates. Not just structurally, but socially, every thud of mortar on concrete echoed like a drumbeat of rebellion. Karen, she wasn't taking it well. On Tuesday, she tried to summon a special HOA inspection squad, which turned out to be her best friend Rhonda and some guy named Bill, who once painted curbs for the city in 1998. They strutted up my driveway like a bad improv troupe and demanded I cease and desist all unsanctioned elevation increases. I handed them laminated copies of the bylaws and a donut. Rhonda took the donut. Bill took a photo of my wall and muttered something about structural elegance. Karen predictably took offense. Then came the emergency HOA board meeting, held at the community clubhouse, a beige box of passive-aggressive energy where dreams went to die under fluorescent lighting. Karen walked in late but loud, her heels clicking like she was summoning spirits of bylaws past. I was already there, seated quietly, with a 3-ring binder labeled compliance receipts and spite. She launched into a rant about how my wall disrupted the community aesthetic, how it posed a trip hazard, and how I'd clearly manipulated a procedural gray area. I waited until she started waving a laser pointer at a photo of my wall, then calmly stood and said, "Actually, Karen, I followed your rules so hard they looped around and hit you in the face," gasps. One guy choked on his complimentary scone. The HOA's legal advisor, whom Karen dragged in for intimidation, flipped through my paperwork, then reluctantly agreed. Everything was legal, official, untouchable. The motion to retroactively deny my wall failed 5-2. Only Karen and Rhonda voted yes. Rhonda looked genuinely confused by her own hand being up. Karen stormed out, but not before hissing, "You may have won this battle, Michael, but the war isn't over. Oh, but Karen, you should have picked someone who wasn't a structural engineer with a grudge and a filing cabinet full of certified mail receipts." The next morning, I found a violation notice duct taped to my front door. Apparently, my construction materials were stored in plain view, never mind that I had a permit, was actively building, and had everything stacked neatly and covered like a Martha Stewart tutorial. The handbook did allow for a 7-day window for active projects, but did that stop Karen? Nope. I didn't argue. I escalated. I rented a portable storage pod, parked it precisely 17 feet from the curb, 1 inch more than the HOA's required setback, and labeled the side Active Project Storage Set Code 3.5C compliant. When Karen came stomping by with her camera, she found nothing but code-compliant, steel-framed disappointment. I waved from the porch. She didn't wave back, probably because she'd just realized what everyone else was starting to see too. Her rain wasn't just cracking, it was crumbling. Karen didn't show her face for 2 whole days after the storage pod incident, which in Sunnyside time is basically a season finale. But she came back swinging. Figuratively, not literally, though judging by the amount of perfume cloud she wore, chemical warfare wasn't off the table. This time, her assault came in the form of a county building inspector. A man in khakis and a clipboard strutted up my driveway with all the swagger of someone who once failed out of architecture school but still wanted to make people cry about gutters. "We've received a complaint that you're building without proper permits," he said. I smiled because this part was my jam. I didn't just show him my permits. I presented them in a leather folio with index tabs and a signed copy from the city zoning office. He flipped through it like he was hoping to find a typo that could save his afternoon. He didn't. "This is some of the best residential masonry I've seen," he mumbled, clearly annoyed that I had out-proficiented his profession. But I wasn't done. "While you're here," I added casually, "have you seen the HOA's new fountain at the entrance?" His eyes narrowed like a bloodhound catching a scent. "Funny you mentioned that," he said. "We've had complaints, but every time we check, they say permits are in process." Spoiler, they weren't. Turns out Karen had fast-tracked that tacky Greco-Roman disaster with HOA funds, but never bothered to file permits. Within a week, the county hit the HOA with a $5,000 cents fine and slapped a big red stop work order on her beloved water feature. The decorative cherubs looked confused. I just looked satisfied. But I wasn't content with a fine, no. Karen had triggered my inner engineer-lawyer hybrid. I started digging. Not trenches. This time it was paperwork. I filed public records requests, reviewed HOA board meeting minutes, talked to ex-board members who'd left under mysterious circumstances, read Karen drama, and cross-checked financials with a retired CPA neighbor who used to do books for the city. The deeper I went, the messier it got. Karen had been running the HOA like her personal fiefdom. Handshake deals with her brother-in-law's landscaping company, missing receipts, inflated maintenance budgets, phantom consulting fees that looked suspiciously like spa weekends. Meanwhile, my wall, it was finished. 6 feet of glorious, regulation-compliant cinder block, topped with tasteful planters. Every inch was up to code, structurally sound, and exactly what the handbook allowed. Neighbors started coming by, not to complain, but to admire. "It's like a metaphor," one said. "Strong, impenetrable, HOA-proof." Another whispered, "Karen's been trying to cite me for my wind chimes for years." You're our hero, but I wasn't interested in hero status. I wanted one thing: peace. Peace and maybe a small flowering vine to climb my legally sanctioned wall come spring. But Karen, she wanted war. What she didn't realize was I had already built my fortress, literally. And what came next would shake the HOA more than any hedge or wall ever could, because the next HOA meeting, oh, that one wasn't going to end with scones and passive-aggressive eye roll. It was going to end with a vote and a reckoning. The annual HOA meeting had always been a low-stakes, low-attendance snooze fest. Last year, I heard it was just Karen, her bestie Doreen, and a guy who thought he was there for bingo night. But this year, let's just say the RSVP list could have crashed a wedding website. Word had spread about the wall, about the fountain fiasco, about Karen's legendary meltdown in my front yard that Marcus live-streamed and labeled Karen versus the Excavator. The video had over 6,000 views and 3 remixes. I arrived early at the community clubhouse with 2 large boxes. One held 97 sealed envelopes. The other, pure bureaucratic carnage. Printouts of financial statements, email chains, meeting minutes Karen tried to accidentally misplace, and a beautifully bound summary of every bylaw she'd trampled like a wine-fueled Godzilla. Each envelope had a cover sheet that read in bold, "Is this who you want enforcing your lawn height?" Below it, a side-by-side image of Karen's unauthorized fountain in my permitted wall. Spoiler, the fountain didn't look good in stop-work yellow tape. By 7:03 p.m., the room was packed. Folding chairs were dragged out of closets. People stood along the walls. Even Mrs. Ramirez, who never left her house unless there was cake involved, showed up with binoculars like it was neighborhood Wimbledon. Karen walked in 15 minutes late, clipboard clutched like a holy relic, lips tight, blouse one trimmer away from exploding. She paused when she saw the envelopes, saw the crowd, saw me sipping tea in the back like I wasn't the architect of her pending downfall. She cleared her throat. "Let's begin with the approval of the previous minutes." "I move for a vote of no confidence," a voice called. Heads turned, retired accountant, former HOA treasurer, an absolute legend in orthopedic sneakers. Karen stuttered, "But it's not on the agenda." "It doesn't have to be," Mrs. Chen replied, voice like a courtroom gavel. "Article 4, Section 9, if seconded by at least 10% of attending members, the motion takes precedence." A dozen hands shot up. Boom, motion secured. Karen's eyes darted, scanning for backup. Doreen looked like she wanted to crawl under her folding chair. "Everything in this so-called report is lies," Karen hissed, waving my dossier in the air like a priest holding garlic. "Distortion, slander." Mrs. Chen calmly adjusted her glasses. "Actually, it's mostly spreadsheets." Stood up, walked to the projector, plugged in the flash drive. The room dimmed. And then came the slideshow. Karen issuing fines to residents for unapproved tulip species. Karen signing off $30,000, 0 cents, for the fountain with no permit. Karen yelling at a 6-year-old for sidewalk chalk defacement. And the piece de resistance email threads showing she paid her brother-in-law's landscaping crew twice the normal rate, billed it to the HOA, then quietly funneled the difference into a miscellaneous expense line item. Silence. Then whispers, then anger, a hand raised. "Mr. Patel, I vote yes. Remove her." Another. "Mrs. Morales, she fined me because my son's toy truck was visible from the porch." Another. "She banned my pride flag." Then it spread like wildfire, hands everywhere. The vote was called. Out of 97 present, 92 voted in favor of removing Karen. 3 abstained. 2 of Karen and Doreen voted against. And with that, Karen's reign was officially over. But here's the twist. That was only Act 1, because the new interim president, he had a surprise announcement waiting. And Karen, well, she wasn't leaving quietly, not without one final messy scene that made the fountain scandal look like a lemonade spill. Karen didn't just leave the podium. She was practically dragged off it by the weight of her own ego. Her face had gone from fake tan orange to blotchy crimson as David Thompson, the newly appointed interim president and a retired high school principal with 0 patience for drama, calmly stood and addressed the room like he was breaking up a cafeteria food fight. Effective immediately, he said, "All pending violation notices are suspended until further review. We'll also be launching a forensic audit of the HOA's finances over the last 3 years." Karen froze like someone had unplugged her brain mid-glitch. The crowd was buzzing louder than a lawnmower on discount gas. Right as she tried to slink out the side door, the real cherry on this HOA-flavored sundae arrived. Sheriff's Deputy Rachel Kim, badge out, warrant in hand. "Karen Wilkins," she said loud enough for the room to snap back to full attention, "you are under investigation for financial misconduct, procedural violations, and unauthorized property destruction. Please come with us." You could hear the intake of breath across the room like it was a flash mob of karma. Karen's mouth flapped open like a broken screen door. "This is a mistake," she screeched. "I am the HOA." "Not anymore," David replied, without even looking at her. And just like that, the clipboard queen was dethroned in front of her kingdom, her designer heels clicking furiously against the tile floor as she was escorted out like a trash bin placed out on the wrong day. But here's where things got truly poetic. While the crowd dispersed into clusters of whispered gossip and celebratory mutterings, I stayed behind to clean up my projector and documents. That's when Robert Wilkins, yes, Karen's husband, walked up to me with a look I can only describe as a mix of guilt, exhaustion, and catharsis. I knew she was intense, he muttered, handing me an envelope, but I didn't know she was dangerous. That's on me. I enabled it for years. Inside was a personal check for $40,000, 0 cents. Consider repayment for the wall, the hedges, the storage, the permits, and the hell. Also, I filed for divorce. She can keep the fountain. As I stood there holding the check, still half expecting it to burst into flames from the sheer karma of the moment, something dawned on me. This wasn't just about HOA bylaws or architectural compliance or even that god-awful fountain. It was about community, about people finally waking up from the HOA-induced trance of fear and finding their backbone. And the best part, this rebellion didn't need pitchforks. It just needed one good wall and a hell of a lot of paperwork. But don't think for a second this was the end, because what I found next, buried deep in the HOA's digital archives, made everything that had come before feel like foreplay. And it was going to blow the lid off the biggest HOA scam this county had ever seen. It started with a folder named vendor_invoices_2019_final, which, spoiler alert, was anything but final. My curiosity wasn't idle nosiness. It was strategic paranoia. After all, Karen had ruled Sunnyside Estates like a paranoid warlord with a clipboard. So I dug, and what I found made the wall drama look like kindergarten finger painting. First, those overpriced landscaping bills, not just a coincidence. Turns out the contractor Karen had been so fond of, J. Wilkins Property Services, was run by her cousin Jeff. The J wasn't exactly a riddle, and the payments, double market rate, irregularly itemized, and monthly as clockwork. But the real jackpot was an internal HOA board message log Karen had forgotten to scrub from a shared Google Drive folder. Buried in it was an email chain between her and a former board member, subject line, "Let's make it disappear." The attachment, a scanned document showing a $15,000 0 cents consulting fee paid to a ghost LLC registered to a P.O. box 2 towns over. That's the thing about control freaks. They document everything. It's just that sometimes they're too confident to hide it well. Compiled the entire mess, PDFs, spreadsheets, email exports, screenshots, and labeled the flash drive Karen Gate Volume 2. Because yes, at this point, it was a sequel. I handed it off directly to Deputy Kim with a simple message: "You're going to want a big cup of coffee for this one." She called me the next morning laughing, "Michael, you just handed us a full RICO starter pack." Apparently it wasn't just the HOA that had been scammed. Some of the construction funds for public spaces, like the fountain and clubhouse upgrades, had been reimbursed through county programs, meaning Karen might have just committed fraud on a federal level. Meanwhile, the neighborhood's vibe had done a full 180. Kids were back to riding bikes without helmet citation warnings. Flower beds had never looked more diverse or more rebellious. Someone even installed a gnome flipping the bird on Karen's old lawn. Subtle? No. Satisfying? Absolutely. And then came the mailer, anonymously sent to every resident. Karen Wilkins used your HOA dues to pay her cousin, fund her fake LLC, and threaten disabled grandmothers over sunflower wind chimes. You paid for the fountain. She claimed the credit. Feeling conned yet? It wasn't subtle, but it was effective. By the time the county audit team showed up, Karen's name was already a curse word in most households. One old-timer was heard yelling, "Don't Karen me, I paid my dues," like it was a new form of swearing. Every day someone would knock on my door, handing me their own stories, quiet little injustices they'd been too afraid to speak about for years. A flag too tall, a doorbell sound deemed too cheerful, petunias not matching the palette. And suddenly the war I started wasn't just mine, it belonged to the whole neighborhood. Sunnyside Estates had woken up, and with Karen's power gone, all that was left was cleanup. Or so I thought, because 2 weeks later I got a letter, mailed from a correctional facility, return address, K. Wilkins. And inside, just 4 words: "This isn't over, Michael." Cute. I'll admit, getting a letter from a prison postmarked Karen Wilkins, inmate 84,733, felt like winning some twisted suburban bingo. At first, I thought it might be a threat or some dramatic manifesto written in lipstick on linen stationery. But no, just four chilling words on a plain note card. This isn't over, Michael. No punctuation, no signature, just a final gasp from a woman who'd lost her throne but not her delusions. I chuckled and pinned it to the fridge next to Lily's drawing of a stick figure Karen being eaten by sunflowers. It was cathartic art. But Karen, even from behind bars, still had a few tricks left in her worn leather binder. The HOA board received a demand letter from her lawyer, well, a lawyer who graduated from a very generous online law school, stating that her removal was procedurally invalid and that the vote had been tainted by libel and organized insubordination. She requested full reinstatement, back pay, and get this, a formal written apology. It was so ridiculous, the board secretary accidentally snorted coffee during the meeting. Meanwhile, I focused on what really mattered, rebuilding community. With Karen's grip gone, residents started breathing easier. The HOA's new interim president, Mr. Thompson, implemented actual reforms. Gone were the arbitrary fines and HOA Gestapo patrols. In came transparency reports, open Q&A sessions, and, bless him, a full audit of the past 5 years of financials. The findings? Oh, Karen had been busy. Not just nepotism, but phantom vendors, phantom repairs, even a phantom holiday event that somehow cost $8,000, 0 cents, and featured a DJ no one had ever seen. That DJ turned out to be Karen's niece. The event was a dinner party held at her lake house 3 towns over. Public sentiment hit boiling point, and then, poetic justice, Karen's husband filed a civil suit, not just for divorce, but to recover misappropriated marital assets, including the HOA funds. Turns out love isn't blind, just very patient, until the HOA newsletter starts featuring your mugshot. And yes, that happened. Page 1, bold font, former president charged with grand larceny and fraud. Karen's empire had crumbled to ash, but something better had grown in its place. The board voted to repurpose her beloved community fountain fund into a scholarship program for local trade school students. The same residents she once fined for having chipped paint, now they were volunteering to repaint fences for free. The same people she threatened with citations, they organized a community BBQ where we roasted metaphorical marshmallows over Karen's legacy. At that BBQ, little Italy, whose communication device was now upgraded thanks to community donations, stood up and typed out a message that got projected on the clubhouse wall. Thank you for showing me grown-ups can change, too. There were more than a few tears, even from me. And as I sat there, ribs in one hand, iced tea in the other, watching neighbors laugh instead of whisper, I realized something. Karen didn't just lose. She accidentally gave us back our neighborhood. And me? I went back to my corner lot, leaned on my cinder block wall, the one she swore would never stand, and smiled, because sometimes the strongest structures aren't built with concrete or steel. They're built with quiet defiance, righteous pettiness, and one very well-timed application form, roll credits. But you already knew. This wasn't just about Hedges. It was about hope, wrapped in HOA-approved tan. And so that's how a $2,000 0 cents row of shrubs turned into a $30,000 0 cent scandal, a dethroned HOA tyrant, and one very satisfied engineer with a 6-foot monument to playing by the rules. Better than anyone else in the room. Sometimes the best way to fight chaos is with order. Ruthless, precise, documented to the inch order. Karen brought the clipboard, but Michael brought the code book. And in the end, justice wasn't loud, it was legal. If you enjoyed watching a woman's HOA empire crumble under the weight of her own bylaws, don't forget to like this video, comment below with your own insane neighborhood drama, and subscribe for more tales where poetic justice comes with receipts, timestamps, and a measuring tape. Stay sharp, stay sarcastic, and never underestimate a man with a permit and a grudge.